You know, there's a few subjects that people say you shouldn't talk about in company. I guess those would be taxes, who you voted for president, politics, certainly that goes in there. But I'll throw another one into the ring for you, giving. Giving is an incredible idea that people really get confused about. And that's what I want to talk to you about on the Blessed Life series today and here on The Bottom Line. This is The Bottom Line for April 22nd, 2018. Life Not Law, the Blessed Life series. Yeah, sometimes people come along and they say, okay, I got you on this one, Pastor. Let's talk about giving. And I usually know how this is going to go. And I'm just going to tell you up front, I believe in tithe. I know some pastors don't, but the majority do. Scholars, yeah, the majority believe in tithe too. And then the others, I'm not sure what they believe necessarily, but sometimes people come along and say, I want to talk to you about giving because the law, that was under the law. And listen, yes, it was under the law. It was also about 430 years prior to the law where we see Abram do this very cool tithe towards that mysterious priest by the name of Melchizedek. And we know Jesus is the perfect representation and symbolic and da-da-da-da, which is really cool. So I can make the argument for preceding it. But regardless, even if I believe that it was only under the law, I'll tell you without a doubt, tithing is not law to me. It's life. It's been my whole family's life. It's how I grew up. It was my existence. It's a part of my DNA. And so when I talk about giving, I talk about it as someone that says, man, do this, like breathing, and you're going to live. And I wouldn't hoard the idea of breathing from someone. So why would I hoard the idea of not teaching on giving? But it's divisive for many people because, money is tough. And we walked through that crazy recession where stuff was just blowing up the wrong way and people were losing houses and jobs and everything else. And I get it. There was crazy stuff going on. And sometimes we forget how blessed we really are, even in relationship when the world is crumbling. That was the world system that went it just went down. And it brought a lot of people down with us. Some of it by our own devices. Some of us made some bad decisions. But other things, it was just the way it went. But I can tell you this, that when we really grab on to this idea that this is life, then this really speaks to this idea of that God has all of us. My dad was an amazing, he was my hero. When he passed a couple years ago, I still feel that. I still think about him and I love him dearly. But I was preaching a message about 5 years ago and I said, Dad, could you write for me your giving story? And the long and short of it is that when he first got married, him and my mom were in a little town in eastern Canada, and they were Pentecostal preachers, and people didn't like them in town. They wanted church just their own way, and they didn't like how fiery and passionate he was. And so he was earning $1.56 a week. $1.56. This is 1953. And when you think about that, you go, how do you live on $1.53? Well, or $1.56? Well, I'll tell you how he did it. He gave 20 cents to the Lord. Part of it was tithe, his 10% was tithe, and the rest was offering. My dad believed completely that God would provide. He moved in a kind of faith that most of us are really afraid to move in. But he would tell you, listen, I saw God's provision. As a habit, he would go to the post office because there would be money in the mail for him. People would show up at their house, people that didn't even like him, but they felt sorry for them because they had no income. And so they would show up with food. His favorite roast beef would show up. He said that came all the time. It was so funny. But milk and eggs and other things. And even people that didn't like him, God would keep awake and show them by way of dream that they needed to help this Pentecostal preacher. So money would come along. And there was one Saturday, Dad was walking to the post office, and one of the guys who was the most adamant that Dad leave town, that he just was no good for the Christian community and everything else, stood between him and the post office where Dad would often go, and there would be money. Someone would send a check or whatever. And the guy reached into his pocket and handed him a wad of cash. And I don't know how much it was, but Dad would say it was more than he'd ever had. And the guy handed him a wad of cash, and the guy said, God won't let me sleep until I give this to you, and I won't sleep again tonight unless you have this. So take it. And the guy walked away muttering and everything else. And my dad would tell you, listen, that was the beginning of of a life where I was just all in with Jesus, that he had everything about me. So I would, if he asked for 20 cents out of $1.56, I gladly gave 20 cents out of $1.56. Folks, what I'm getting at is giving. You can hide in stories of law or where it shows up or timelines, or you can go, oh, well, it precedes the law. You can get into all that. And I just want to set you free from that today and ask you this question. Does he have all of you? Do you trust him? I mean, you trust him with your eternity. Do you trust him with your wallet? Do you trust him with how he's going to move you forward? Do you trust that he has a plan and purpose for your life? So maybe he's speaking to you. And here's the other side. Sometimes people say, well, I give under grace. Well, you know what? Jesus believed in grace, and he always raised the standard. The law said, do not murder. Jesus said, don't be angry with someone. And if you want to live on the law, I said, well, give 10%. Well, Jesus always was raising the standard. So living in grace, it just might cost you more. What I'm getting at is just when we just don't want to grab on to some of the principles, especially Malachi, where it says, test me in this. You know, we believe what Malachi says about divorce. We believe what he says about being lazy or having inappropriate worship. We teach all those things. But why don't we believe what he says about tithe? Well, because most often we just don't want to. What I'm telling you is today is, does he have all of you? And once he has all of you, then begin to have this conversation about how you can honor him with your first, how you can honor with tithe, and see that God can do a lot with $1.56. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you again very soon.